Hello and welcome to this episode of Lasting Transformation with me, Alan Parry, the author of How to Remove Trauma Response, a Memory Reconsolidation Guidebook for Therapists and Coaches. Now, in this episode, I want to talk about something that's probably quite familiar to you. And it's that point where you're in a session and you realize that the thing that the client is bringing is a pattern, is a problem that has been running for them for like a really long time, like maybe 15, 20, 30, maybe even 40 years. And you realize that this is a really entrenched issue. And you have that picture in your mind of, this isn't just a string with a single knot in. This is like a tangled ball of string. And so before you've even begun, this thought settles and this feeling settles within you where you're like, this is a long-standing, stubborn issue. And so this one's going to be quite knotty. It's going to be a lot harder, this one. Simply because this is a pattern that's been around for 25, 30, 40 years. So this is going to be particularly stubborn. And maybe you've been on the other side of the fence and you're someone who is carrying a pattern like that and you're thinking, oh, well, if it's been around for 15, 20, 30 years and it's been so stubborn and it won't leave even though I want it to leave, and I'm stuck with this problem and this pattern that keeps recurring over and over, maybe this is just kind of something that's quite stuck. And so whichever role that you're in there, you're going through a similar experience. You're thinking, this one's going to be much more difficult to untangle. This one, any change is going to be harder. And if you're a practitioner, of course, you'd never say it out loud, but nonetheless, it's there. That thought is there. That assumption is there. That feeling is there because, I don't know, maybe there's a slight clenching or a small brace or a flinch in your body because you really want to help this person. And you're thinking, this is a long-held pattern. And so this one's going to be harder to create transformation. And the thing is, that feels like it's a responsible thought. It feels like this is realism. It feels like, well, at least I'm not being naive about this. And I'm not being unrealistic. But what this episode is about is to try and shift your view on that. And it comes from a wonderful question I had from one of our fabulous practitioners inside of the Memory Reconsolidation Elite Coaching Academy that has inspired this episode. Because what I'd like you to leave with is a different sense of that particular issue. Because what I'm going to argue in this is suppose that it's not actually, and it's good news, it's not actually realistic to think, well, if this has been around for longer, it's more stubborn, and so it will be harder to remove this issue than, say, others. It's just a conceptual gap that maybe no one's ever filled for you before. And so in this episode, I want to teach you how to bridge that conceptual gap so that you, by the end of it, have a different sense of what happens when somebody comes in with a pattern that has lasted a long time. And so your initial thought is to think, oh no, this is entrenched. And so this is going to take longer. And like I say, maybe you're in the client position or potentially a client and you're thinking about some of your own issues and you're thinking, I may as well not bother because this is just entrenched. And if it's been around for 30 years, then surely I'm going to have to spend about 30 years unpicking this thing. So by the end of this episode, I really want you to have a different sense of how that all works. Now, there's three things I want to talk about. The first one is I want to talk about that the way to sort this problem probably isn't what you think. Secondly, I want to talk about an analogy, which I think of as the cassette tape. Slightly ages me, doesn't it? But hopefully Even if you didn't grow up with cassette tapes as I did, you kind of know what they are and know how they work. And the final one, I want to talk about tenses, past tense, present tense, future tense, and how that all shows up in terms of this discussion. So let's start with the first point, because when that dread arrives, what most practitioners go to is a sense of, oh, I don't know what I should be doing here. And so I need more experience maybe. And that's just going to take time to become more experienced. Or it might be, I need to add another modality. I need to find a different therapy modality and start stacking those up, and that's going to be the answer to this. But what people find when they do that is that feeling of what do I do now in the session, it's not fixed by just stacking up modalities. And it's not even fixed by just being more experienced and seeing this, because it's not really a skills gap as such. I mean, it kind of is, but it's certainly not a modalities gap. It's not that, it's not going to be fixed by, I've learned 19 modalities, so maybe just the 20th one will be the one that fixes this. It's actually a conceptual gap. And the reason why I say it's a conceptual gap is because every one of these modalities kind of gives you a protocol. It's kind of what you need to learn when you're working with a client, especially a client who's got this deeply entrenched problem, is that you need to do this, and then you need to do that, and you need to do that, and then you need to do this. You do it step by step, and it has to be in the right order, and you have to do it perfectly, and you have to follow the protocol. And you have to do it right. And so we're taught these protocols, but what almost all of them never do is to explain the brain process that makes any of it work whenever it does. And the reason why that's really important is because you can learn a protocol, you can apply it perfectly, the session goes brilliantly, and you could explain it by saying, well, it went well because I followed the protocol. But why did the protocol work? And the thing that makes that even more puzzling is you know that you've followed the protocol perfectly before, and the whole thing stalled and went off the rails and didn't work. And so you're thinking, well, if I follow the protocol perfectly and get a result, but then the next time follow the protocol perfectly and it doesn't get a result, why is it actually working? And this is the big conceptual gap that I'm talking about, because rather than learning protocols without even understanding the brain process that makes any of them work when they do, and what the brain process is that explains why it doesn't work when it doesn't work, is that you need to be taught the map of what the brain needs in order to make transformational change. And if nobody has ever explained that territory, then it makes sense then, doesn't it, that you're going to think, oh, well, I've only learned 99 modalities. I need to go and learn 100th modality. So it makes sense that even when you've learned a lot, that you're still stuck in that hit and miss place and not fully understanding why. And it makes sense too that if a client arrives with like 15 or 20 or 25 years of pattern supposedly entrenched, that your nervous system fills that gap with an assumption that says, it's been here for longer, so it's going to be harder to change. Now, one of the reasons why it feels harder to change, even in your experience, is that a lot of protocols are what I would think of as counteractive. They counteract the problem. And so something that has been around for a long time and is there for a really good reason will feel particularly stubborn if you're using methods that essentially wrestle with the old emotional learning without actually removing it. And so what I want to talk about in the rest of this podcast is to take that assumption oh, it's more entrenched, so it's going to be harder to update that learning. It's going to be harder to get to a resolution. And explain that actually it doesn't, and here's why. And so that leads me on to the second part. We've looked at, my contention is in point 1 there, that it's not a modalities lack. It's not even an experience lack. The real lack here is that no one really teaches, very few people anyway, teach the thing that I'm talking about here, which is the actual brain process that explains transformational change. And so in this second part of the episode, I promised I would talk to you about cassette tapes. Now, cassette tapes were very popular when I was growing up, and I can remember going to the music store where they would sell records and so on, and I would buy albums as cassette tapes, and I'd take that cassette tape home and I'd play the cassette tape and I'd listen to the music. And so that does date me, but video cassettes as well were the same kind of thing. So I want you to think of a cassette tape, and I want you to imagine a cassette tape that contains a brand new recording that was made, say, just yesterday. And now I want you to hold another cassette tape in the other hand. And this is an album from 1966, say. It's a Beatles album. And so it was recorded then. It's 60 years old, and that's been played countless times. Now, if we take our sense of how do we create change in terms of the brain, and that sense of, oh, one's been around for longer, so it's going to be harder, that view would imply that in order to overwrite the Beatles tape, you're going to have to just keep on doing it. You're going to have to record with the music you actually want on the tape, but every now and again, you're going to be like, oh no, it hasn't worked. I've just heard Paul McCartney singing, yeah, yeah, yeah. And then you have to do it again, and do it again, and do it again. But in actual fact, that's not how cassette tapes work, is it? If you want to tape over the brand new recording, or you want to tape over the 60-year-old recording from the Beatles album that you've played countless times, well, the process is actually identical, isn't it? If you want to tape over both of them, the process is the same. You put the cassette in, you press record, and the new audio replaces the old. It's overwritten in exactly the same way, whether it's a brand new tape with a brand new recording that's barely been played, or an entrenched, in inverted commas, an entrenched recording that's been around for 60 years that you've played every single day, the whole time. So I'm using that analogy because with a cassette tape, the age of the original recording changes absolutely nothing about how the update happens. So just sit with that and let that land. The age of the original recording has nothing to do with how the update happens. And the reason why I'm emphasizing that particular point is because emotional learning works exactly the same way. A belief, a prediction that was formed, say, in childhood, and there's been around for, say, 30 years in this stubborn pattern, and something that's more recent, they're both active predictions that are running right now, and they're both overwritten in exactly the same way. The process of memory reconsolidation works very similar to that cassette tape. Essentially what we do is we activate an old emotional learning in order to find the one that we want to update. And then when the trigger, the biological mechanism of memory reconsolidation is triggered, and that biological mechanism kicks into being, then that brain pathway, much like a cassette tape that holds the old emotional learning, is updated. So let's go back to that metaphor because I really want you to get this. I want you to keep hold of that analogy. That actually, just like a cassette tape, an emotional learning that's been running for decades and an emotional learning that is more recent and might be considered from that old assumption as less entrenched, the way that we update it biologically in terms of that brain mechanism is exactly the same. An old emotional learning might have been around for a long time, but the process of change when we use reconsolidation is no more complex than if it was quite a recent emotional learning. Now, I know that it seems that it's going to be more complex, and I know it feels that way. But like I say, when you follow the roadmap, that at each stage of the roadmap, it moves you towards and eventually results in you reaching the destination of memory reconsolidation, where that transformational brain mechanism kicks in, then that overwrites the old emotional learning. But if you're not using that roadmap, if you're not working in a memory reconsolidation way, what you'll probably be using are ways that keep the old learning while counteracting it. You've got a kind of a wrestling match the whole time. A little bit like I said before, it's like trying to listen to the new songs that you wanted while the Beatles album is being played full blast in the background. And of course that feels hard. Of course that feels stubborn. When we're counteracting something, we're keeping the thing while wrestling with it. We're chipping away at it really quite slowly. But reconsolidation works different. It's the brain mechanism that is responsible for lasting transformational change. And the way that works is very analogous to the cassette tape. So finally, I want to look at tenses, past tense, present tense, and future tense. So we've seen that the problem isn't actually that you don't have enough modalities. The problem really is that we need to really understand the brain mechanism that creates transformational change. And that's the gap that will take us from that dread of, oh, this is going to be really complicated and take a long time, to a place of, oh, actually, this is more like a cassette tape. And so I want to talk about tenses, because as practitioners, we often think that the answer is in the past tense, and there's often some understanding in the past tense. But remember that we're never changing the past. The past tense has a relevance because it left a footprint. And the footprint that it left is an emotional learning of how we then continue to see the world. It leaves behind a core prediction that runs on autopilot and impacts the way we think of the world and feel the world and sense the world and see the world and predict what's happening next. But that prediction is running now. And if a difficult past event had never left that footprint, well, we wouldn't be helping somebody with that problem. The reason why someone has a problem is that there is a prediction running, not in the past tense, even though it was written there, but it is running on autopilot in the here and now. It's a present day prediction. And so when we're doing transformational work, even though the past has a relevance because that's when it was written, much like the old Beatles recording has a relevance because that's when it was written, when we're looking to do change, we're really working in the present. We're working with a prediction that is a present day prediction. It's not past tense. We're not changing the past. We're changing the prediction that lives in the present. And in fact, the only other tense that's at play is the prediction is making a prediction about the future, maybe the near future. Like, I don't know, if someone's socially anxious, they might say, well, if I were to allow myself to go over there and mix with those people, then a bad thing will happen. You know, they'll mock me and it'll be like when I was bullied at school. And so the emotional learning is written back when they were bullied at school. But the really important thing is that it's operational right now. And so as practitioners, we're always working with the present tense. We're always working with a prediction that exists now. we're always working with a cassette tape in our hand that can be overwritten. And so when a client who's carried something for 4 decades, all that means is, like the Beatles album, it was written, it was created, that prediction, a long time ago. And so even if we don't know exactly the point of origin, it doesn't really matter as long as we get a real strong handle on what that prediction looks like today. And the key thing here basically is that even if something has been around for, say, 15, 20, 30 years, the process of changing a present day prediction is exactly the same no matter when that present day prediction was created. Let's go back to the cassette tapes again. It doesn't matter when the cassette was recorded. It doesn't matter how many times it's been played. It exists in the present tense. And when it's updated, the process is exactly the same. So the mechanism doesn't really care, the brain mechanism of memory reconsolidation. It doesn't care whether you've carried this pattern around for 3 months or 30 years. It's a present day prediction. It's stored in a brain pathway in the here and now. It's a learning that is operating in the here and now. And when you trigger memory reconsolidation, that here and now prediction, irrespective of when it was written, irrespective of how many times that prediction has been played out, that present here and now prediction is overwritten. So when this lands, and when you understand the roadmap of how to get to memory reconsolidation, and you understand that no matter how stubborn this is felt, it's just a present day prediction. It's just a cassette tape. And the process for overwriting it is exactly the same as any other present day prediction. Once that really lands, not just intellectually, but in your body as a practitioner, then something really does shift. The dread that can come, the bracing that we spoke of earlier, the tension that can sometimes kick in, the tummy twist, where we're thinking, this is going to be more difficult because it's more stubborn, it's more entrenched. You realize that it's not true. And so all of that lifts. And what was heavy becomes something that you can walk into with a completely different quality of presence, a completely different confidence, because you can say, okay, I know this was written a long time ago. I know this is a pattern that has played out, because of course it will. It became a here and now prediction that has stuck around. But it's still just a here and now prediction. And so my ability to transform and update this and facilitate experiences where the client's brain will update this old learning for them is exactly the same as with anybody else. And so you get this sense of confidence. And it's the confidence that comes from knowing not just what to do, but why it actually works. It's a funny kind of thing, really, because when you're thinking about updating a cassette tape, let's say you had like a few boxes, like some shoe boxes with old cassette tapes in, and you wanted to record over one of them. It'd probably take you longer to find the tape than it would to press record. And it's kind of similar in our work. Finding what's the relevant emotional learning that's keeping the problem alive is where we're kind of hunting around in the shoebox. And that actually takes longer, typically, than the point of update, the point where the cassette is actually updated, the point of reconsolidation itself. And so, hopefully, by holding on to that cassette analogy, by understanding it's just a here and now prediction, doesn't matter when it was formed, doesn't matter how many times it's been played. It seems stubborn when we're doing counteractive types of therapy work, where we're trying to battle it while keeping it alive. But with reconsolidation, where it's an erasure process, an update process, much like the cassette tape, then it's totally different. And it's no more stubborn than anything else. And so when you realize that, the body just feels lighter. We feel confident because we know why the work works, and because we know why it works, and we know how to follow that map of memory consolidation, we know just what to do. So let's close this episode then and just have a recap. What we've looked at is, first of all, that this is not a modalities gap. If you know 1,000 modalities, knowing 1,001 isn't going to sort this. What really matters is that you understand not what protocols do, not those very rigid steps of protocols, but the roadmap that leads you to the brain process that makes any of those protocols work. And we saw that longer doesn't mean harder, because it's like a cassette tape. And so all we're dealing with here is, well, we don't have to go into the past. We could do, but it's an option. It's not necessary. We don't actually have to know the origin story, because we're just dealing with something that is a present day prediction. And all present day predictions are updated in the same way, no matter when they were born, no matter how long they've been around, no matter how many times that pattern, that emotional learning, that button has been pushed. So we know that it's no more complex, no more difficult, just because it's been around for a long time. We know that the age of a belief tells you nothing about how long change will take. We know that what matters is that a prediction exists in the here and now, and that now is exactly where you do the work, updating that prediction that lives on autopilot and is keeping the problem alive. Because when that prediction, that emotional learning, is recorded over, is updated, is reconsolidated, then the problem that it keeps alive also falls away. So if you've been kind of privately dreading those kind of cases, or even if you're looking at your own life and thinking, well, I have a pattern like that, remember that the mechanism is on your side. This is how brains work. It's not magic. It's not woo-woo. It's cold neuroscience. And it's simply the way the brain works. And so every one of your clients has this brain mechanism on their side. And so it's on your side as well. It's just that you need to understand what the roadmap is that is going to reliably give the brain what it needs in order to trigger that reconsolidation. So if anything that you've heard today has given you a moment of, oh, why didn't anyone explain this before? Then just hold on to that feeling for a moment. And that gap between the transformation that you know now is possible, even with supposedly entrenched issues, the transformation that you know is possible, and the sessions that still feel like guesswork, that gap is not going to be filled by more modalities, especially modalities that don't really give you any information on why they work. And so what you need to do when they don't work, it's filled by understanding the brain mechanism itself. And you don't have to understand the whole brain. It's very specific steps on the roadmap to ensuring the brain gets what it needs to trigger memory reconsolidation. And so by understanding that mechanism, that is the thing that bridges the gap. And that's what the Memory Reconsolidation Elite Coaching Academy is built around. That's why I created it. It's not a protocol that you have to rigidly perform perfectly. It's not a script that you have to follow. It's a framework. It's a roadmap that makes everything you already do make sense, but improves upon it, because it makes sure that what you're doing at the moment can be tweaked to really reliably ensure that you're able to get those transformations, because you're following a roadmap that leads you to the destination of memory reconsolidation. And so even things that are hit and miss, they become workable reliably and consistently. So it's a clear roadmap. It's bite-sized learning. It's self-paced, so there's no deadlines, no pressure. We've got live coaching calls twice a month. You have daily access to me, so you can bring your cases and questions on a daily basis. We've got this incredible community of practitioners who are doing this very different, I'd say, kind of work alongside you. And so if you're feeling as a practitioner like you've had enough of hit and miss results, like you're hitting it out the park sometimes, but other times they're stalling and you can't quite put your finger on why, come and take a look at it. So the link I'll put in the show notes, but it's Fresh Therapists, that's plural, freshtherapists.com/coaching. So there's no pressure, just have a look at it and see if it feels like the missing piece for you. And if it does, then let me know, because you'll be very welcome inside. If you're someone who's thinking about this for yourself and you're thinking, I would like to work with someone one-to-one from a memory reconsolidation standpoint, and you would perhaps maybe like to work with me, then go to alanparry.com and you'll find out more information there. Just make sure that you spell Alan the way I spell it, which is slightly unusual. It's ALUN as Alan Parry. So I hope this has been useful. Remember the cassette tapes. That's the big conceptual shift that I want you to hold in mind, so that whenever you're working with someone going forward and it seems like it's stubborn and it seems like it's entrenched, it seems like it's a metaphor where it's a tangled ball of string with lots of knots in, remember that pattern that's been around for a long time is just like a cassette tape. I hope it's been useful, and I will chat to you soon. Take care now. Bye.